Let's look at some other laws dealing with people who are on the bottom of social structure. So we can give you some examples of some of these. One of the things we like to do is, this picture here is from before the time period I'm going to tell you, but one of the things we like to do is point to the massive improvements in medical care, which were partially due to improvements in anatomical dissection. But here would be a good question. It's going to drive me absolutely insane. Really. Okay, yeah. That's cool. Where did the bodies come from that the anatomists used or that the doctors in training used? Anyone take a guess? Do you think these bodies were donated to science?
Was it the poor and unclean?
The poor and unclean. There's a wonderful book called Death, Dissection, and the Destitute. Now this is, I will go ahead and tell you, this book is highly detailed. She did her homework. But if you are at all interested in, and I know you all are, the Anatomy Act of 1832 in Britain, which is apparently still in force. What they did is they mandated. They said if you died in poverty, the doctors got your body. And this was a big fear at the time. I mean, there were massive issues with this. They're basically saying poverty tax. And this is one of the ways in which the medical schools were able to get their bodies. Or here's another one. I read this book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It is a, I'll give you the description here. It's a biography-based book, and I run a book club, and we happened to read this book last month, so it's fresh in my mind. But it's a biography-based book where they discuss that in, I want to say 1940, they had taken some cells, cancer cells from Henrietta Lacks, and were able to grow them in petri dishes, the first ones that they could really do. And now many drug trials are based on the cells of Henrietta Lacks. And the issues throughout the book were, did she ever give permission for the cells to be taken? Her family apparently lives in abject poverty, while others are making millions and more off her cells. Is that just? And it was a very interesting book about the social inequality, especially among blacks at this particular time. You get a chance. It's actually a very good book. You read this going, man, this is what happened. Woo. Does it remind anyone of other trials that have been done in our country? Maybe in our own state? Like the Tuskegee experiment. Think about the Tuskegee experiment. Who did we use for the Tuskegee experiment? Do we go find a bunch of educated white males and say, we're going to see what happens if you get syphilis?
No.
You start out thinking, who are we using for these trials?
The blind and impoverished.
Yeah, the poor, impoverished, in our country, often blacks. And it's worth thinking as you go across the globe, who does this tend to happen to? Because remember, this chapter is on status. So you go, well, what are the ways in which people treat people, or the cultures treat people of different status? Many authors have argued that our legal system is set up to actively discriminate against the poor. And since y'all know I'm not shy about book recommendations, if you get a chance.
Oh,
very good book.
Very good.
So what is Michelle Alexander arguing?
She's basically saying that like the number of blacks in the prison system today are incarcerated, like it's like an astounding number, and they're being put there because of the fact of marijuana, and marijuana should just be legalized because of it. And it's actually helping the private sector.
Yeah. Marijuana is certainly one part of the argument that the drug laws in general. Think about in the 1980s, there was a law passed against cocaine and crack. Do you remember this?
Yep.
Right, what was this? What happened?
Well, crack's cheaper, but since they say that it did more effects in blacks were more able to use crack, so they got longer sentences than cocaine.
It was something like, was it 50 to 1?
Yeah, something like that.
It was some outrage. I think it may be worse than 50 to 1. What this means is, if, like, I get arrested and you get arrested. You have crack, I have cocaine. Same amount. If I got sentenced to a month in jail, you would get 4 years. And black was primarily used, sorry, crack was primarily used by blacks. I was like, that's a weird sentence. Blacks was used by crack. Wrong sentence. No, but so, I don't know if you don't know what happened. This is true. A couple of years ago, they decided to revise the law. They're like, you know what, this is a racist law. Anyone know what they got the inequity down to? So it's 50 to 1, now it's 5 to 1. Now I would get a month, you would get 5 months. If it's crack. And it was a racial issue. But also what Michelle Alexander argues, and the new Jim Crow really sort of captures the essence of her argument, that after slavery, the question became, all right, how do we still keep blacks as our underclass? We can't put them in slavery, so what did many states, especially in the South, enact? Jim Crow laws. And where we enforced a legal segregation. There's a wonderful documentary. It's on PBS. It may be called The New Jim Crow, the documentary, but it's a documentary on PBS about this time period. And they would see black males standing on a corner, arrest them for loitering, charge them a fine they couldn't afford. A factory owner would come pay the fine, and they had to work for the factory owner for a set period of time to work off what they owed. What does that sound like?
Legalized slavery.
Sounds like legalized. Yeah, so that's part of her argument, is that in effect turned into legalized slavery. Well, after a period of time, it was discovered, okay, this isn't, people are not going to accept this anymore. And so what her argument is that the current drug laws are really a new manifestation of another way of keeping blacks impoverished.
Didn't they make crack more illegal due to the fact that they said that it made like the blacks like bulletproof and unstoppable? I'm serious. Like, I'm pretty sure there was something that
If I smoke crack, I'm bulletproof.
I'm pretty sure like we went over that in class where it said that like they said that if people smoked it, they'd be like bulletproof and all that stuff. It was insane.
I don't know if crack. I don't like it. I don't know. I don't know if crack actually makes you bulletproof. They would say blacks would do crack and they would be able to withstand gunfire.
It would be like just due to the fact to initiate fear into people to understand why the law was that way.
It wouldn't surprise me if people did that. That just strikes me as hysterical. I've certainly felt I was bulletproof, but it's sad. When you start to think, were you going to say something?
I was saying that's where Superman 30 comes in. Like, if you do cocaine, it's like you're Superman, like, you can withstand anything. So, they did have it.
Okay, that would be cocaine too, though.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, cocaine, but crack, since it's a derivative,
yeah, it's cheaper, more easy. There was a documentary. I watch a lot of documentaries, and they're talking about how much they cut cocaine with.
Yeah, it's ridiculous now.
It's like, and you have no way of knowing what your cocaine's been cut with. So we talked about the number of blacks that are in jail. So what you can do is you can actually look at some of these numbers. So you can look at males, females, and the number of races. And so what you can do is you can look at information like this. And you can say, well, here's the total population, 2008, whites, blacks, and Hispanics in jail. Now, looking at these raw numbers, it doesn't really look like there's a major problem. But instead of looking at raw numbers, you can convert this into a more reasonable comparison, where you look at the base rate of how many blacks, whites, Hispanics there are in the country, and how many of them are in jail. And when you do this analysis, you find that for every 100,000 whites, less than 500 are in jail. But over 3,000 black males in jail.
So 2 days ago, I just read an article in the New York Times that said that for the first time in 2 decades, that African Americans are now lower. There are more whites being arrested at a higher rate than of African Americans, but it has to do with the fact that it's black women are no longer being arrested for it. Yeah. So.
I haven't seen that. I have to look for that.
Yeah, it was like really small. It's like almost 15. Like one of those things you.
But the data for a while, I mean, like that would be interesting if that's what's happening. Because black women have never been the real arrest population. It's usually been black males. And I tell you what our country does to black males. Well, ridiculous isn't the right word. It's immoral. We need to start using words that are a little stronger than ridiculous.
Isn't that escalating within the whole just colored sector in general though? Like all the black males are treated, but Hispanics and Asians are on the rise.
I mean,
Right.
you sort of got to look at this and you go, okay, well, what do societies do? Well, those in power write the laws to keep them in power. So in our culture, who's in power? White males, right? So not me, other white males, I assure you. So you start thinking, well, let's say you go to another culture. You say, well, if I am Japanese, I forget which group is it Filipinos they dislike?
It's Japanese?
Yeah. Like there's like, you go across the globe and it's like, you know, like this group hates the Cambodians, this group hates, you know, the Philippines, this group hates, you know, whoever. So you can go across the globe and do this, but the group in power writes the laws to keep themselves in power. And so when you look at what's being done, like the new Jim Crow, it's like, okay, it's like, well, we don't want to give minorities more power. What can we do? Well, let's write the laws in ways that selectively criminalize them. So now I get arrested, I may miss work. So if I miss work, I'm going to lose my job. But now I also have a police record. So now I go apply for another job. What are my chances? Yeah, they're certainly lower. If I remember, what was it? There's some, I don't want to get the number wrong, so it's either 1/4 or 1/3 of black males are having some involvement with the legal system at any time, whether it's probation, parole, jail. And this creates problems in the black community, black women finding mates. Y'all know this? The other classes, or is this? I mean, it's a huge. I mean, it's becoming a huge issue. So, well, what is it? Does anyone know if it's 1/3, 1/4?
I'm pretty sure it's 1/3.
I mean, it's a number that you go. Yeah, it's a lot of people. What you start thinking to yourself, like that is a lot of people in jail for.
There was also concern in the 90s, 80s to 90s, where the number of black males entering the prison and coming out as sodomites, the numbers were like 25.
Coming out as.
I mean, technically.
I mean, there are concerns about violence in prison because we don't do any kind of educational system in prison. Nothing, no real training, rehabilitation. I'll just give you some data here. So for the women, so we can also see the inequity, and you look over the whole population. You start asking. Well, okay, let's think about our state. So you mentioned other minorities. What's one of the big issues right now in our state with minorities? HB 56, right? To where we're like, okay, if you are illegal, if you're an undocumented alien, well, you can't get any resources. People go, that's great, but from the textbook, you would have a question. Who's going to do those jobs?
And you saw it when they passed HB 56, like all the crops went unpicked and brought them bills because farmers couldn't get people that worked hard enough or that were willing to work that hard to pick tomatoes and
For that price. I mean, so your textbook offers the analysis. I mean, it's actually a really good book. if you haven't been reading it, it's actually really, it should be, where they say, well, we're going to build these fences at these places, but it's like, well, most illegal immigrants don't come in those places. They come in legally and stay.
Yep.
And they're like, so are we just security theater? Anyway, y'all's test is next Wednesday, right? Not Wednesday, Wednesday after. No, 26th. So so today's the 22nd. So I think we come back on a Monday. We come back not Monday, the Monday after. So we're gonna do. What?
Today's the eyes.
Today's the 15th.
Alright.
So 22nd would be a week from today.
You said today's 22nd.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to say that. I was just trying to get it right. So we have one more class period, which I was going to do. That was my broader question. To review after y'all's spring break, to review for y'all's test, and we're going to finish up this part and then move to other issues like gender, family, and so forth. Yeah, have a good break.